Have you ever wondered why some messages seem to arrive at exactly the moment we need them most? Not because someone sent them directly to us, but because, in some way difficult to explain, they find a space that had been empty for a long time. Maybe you opened this video out of curiosity. Maybe you clicked without thinking. Perhaps I believed that I would find just one more reflection on Carl Jung. But what if there's a more important question than why did you click? What if the real question is, why did you decide not to continue moving on to the next video? We live convinced that our choices are completely conscious. We say that we follow recommendations, trends, or simple interests of the moment. However, Carl Jung spent much of his life studying something that defies this superficial explanation. He noted that there are times when external events seem to silently respond to internal processes that we have not yet been able to recognize. It is not about magic or romanticized coincidences. It's the way the psyche finds ways to get our attention when we ignore its signals for too long. Perhaps your rational mind is already trying to explain all this. She prefers to believe that it was just an efficient algorithm, a sequence of well-calculated recommendations, or a meaningless fluke. After all, admitting that there is something inside us trying to communicate takes courage. It is much more comfortable to believe that everything is random than to accept that perhaps there is a forgotten part of our own consciousness trying to awaken. But let me ask you another question. How long have you felt that something has been different, even if you can't explain exactly what? Maybe it's not a big deal. Maybe it's just a lingering sense of emptiness, a restlessness that appears in quiet moments, or a strange impression that your life keeps moving forward while some part of you has been left behind. Many people ignore this feeling for years. They continue to work, smiling, fulfilling their responsibilities, and repeating the routine. On the outside, everything seems to work. Inside, something remains waiting. Carl Jung believed that the unconscious never ceases to try to establish contact. When your voice is not heard through intuition, it appears in dreams. When dreams are ignored, it arises through unexpected emotions. And when even these emotions are repressed, reality itself begins to present situations that force us to look at what we have avoided. What we call fate can often be just our own soul's insistence on leading us to an inevitable encounter. It is precisely here that many people get confused. They believe that transformation happens when they find an extraordinary response. Jung saw the process differently. Before the answer emerges, there is always a question hidden within the person. A question so profound that she can't even formulate it with words. Still, this question influences choices, relationships, fears, and desires without the ego realizing it. Think for a moment. How many decisions have you made believing that they were totally free? How many times have you changed paths without understanding exactly why? How many people came into your life just when you most needed to learn a lesson, even if it came with pain? Perhaps these experiences have never been as disconnected as they seemed. There is a part of the psyche that observes everything in silence. She records every repressed emotion, every abandoned dream, every hidden fear, and every talent that has been set aside to please other people. Jung drew attention to this invisible universe because he knew that no one can live in peace while remaining separated from themselves. The more we try to ignore what we feel, the greater the distance between who we appear to be and who we really are. That's why so many people live tired for no apparent reason. It's not just the body that wears out. It is the constant energy needed to keep whole parts of one's personality hidden. The empath is usually well aware of this feeling. Accustomed to understanding the pains of others, he often learns to hide his own needs. Over time, this attitude creates a perfect ground for manipulators to find space to act, exploiting guilt, insecurities, and the permanent need for approval. But no manipulation lasts forever. There is a moment when something awakens and the person begins to realize that the prison was never just outside. Perhaps this is exactly one of those moments. Not because this video has any special power, but because you may finally be willing to see what once seemed invisible. And this difference changes everything. A truth only transforms when it finds someone prepared to receive it. Before that, it goes unnoticed. As you continue to hear these words, another question begins to quietly arise. If there is a part of your mind trying to lead you to a change, why has it remained hidden for so long? The answer is not outside of you. It is precisely in the place that most people avoid looking. It is there that the true journey described by Carl Jung begins. And it is exactly to this unknown territory that we will now go. There's a reason why so many people spend years feeling like something is wrong without being able to pinpoint exactly what it is. They change jobs, start new relationships, buy things they think they want, watch motivational videos, make plans to start a new life next Monday. And for a few days they feel renewed hope. But shortly after, the same feeling returns. A discrete emptiness, a silent restlessness, as if they were walking in circles within their own existence. Carl Jung believed that this happens because the problem is rarely in the external world. The real conflict remains hidden in a place that few have the courage to visit, the shadow itself. When we hear this word, it is common to imagine something dark or scary. But Jung gave it a much deeper meaning. The shadow is not just the dark side of the personality. It also keeps everything that we were forced to hide in order to be accepted. It contains the courage we suppress, the creativity we abandon, the anger we could never express, the dreams we let die to meet the expectations of others. The more we hide these parts, the more they look for ways to get back to the surface. Maybe you've experienced a situation like this without realizing it. Imagine someone who has always been seen as calm, understanding, and unable to say no. Everyone likes him precisely for this reason. He is always available, always ready to help, always willing to solve the problems of those around him. But at some point, little things start to cause disproportionate irritation. A simple comment seems like an offense. An innocent request becomes too heavy. The person does not understand why they are reacting in this way. She believes she has changed. In fact, it hasn't changed. He just began to hear a part of himself that had remained silent for years. This is exactly how the shadow usually manifests itself. It doesn't arrive making noise. It appears in small cracks in the routine, an inexplicable nuisance, a sadness for no apparent reason, a feeling that you no longer belong in the places you've always been. Many interpret this as weakness, crisis, or confusion. Jung saw something completely different. For him, these moments represent the beginning of a profound reorganization of the psyche. The curious thing is that almost no one recognizes this process when it begins. The natural reaction is to try to return to the familiar comfort. We look for distractions. We occupy every minute of the day. We fill our minds with information to avoid silence. The silence is frightening because in it, the voice of the shadow becomes clearer. As long as there is noise, we can pretend that everything remains the same. But there is another detail that Jung observed and that continues to happen daily, although few people realize it. Whenever someone begins to awaken to themselves, certain relationships begin to change in unexpected ways. People who seemed indispensable start to cause discomfort. Conversations that were once pleasant become tiring. Familiar environments start to feel too small. Not because the world has changed suddenly, but because the way of seeing it has begun to transform. It is at this point that many manipulators enter the scene without even consciously realizing what is happening. They identify changes before the person themselves. They realize that something no longer works as before. Guilt ceases to control. Fear begins to lose strength. The constant need for approval slowly diminishes. This poses a threat to those who have always exerted influence through the insecurities of others. Think about how many times someone has tried to make you doubt what you felt. Maybe you were told you were too sensitive, exaggerated, ungrateful, or confused. Perhaps they convinced you that you needed to change in order to be loved. Gradually, without realizing it, you moved away from what you really were. With each over-adaptation, an authentic part of his personality was sent to the shadow. The empath usually lives this process even more intensely. From an early age, he learns to observe emotions, avoid conflicts, and protect those around him. This skill is valuable, but it can turn into imprisonment when a person starts to take care of everyone but themselves. She believes that being good means never letting anyone down. However, the more they abandon their own needs, the more distant they become from their own identity. That's why so many empaths end up surrounded by manipulators. Not because they are weak, but because they have learned to measure their worth by their ability to please. As long as this logic remains active, the shadow continues to grow in silence. It accumulates everything that could not be lived: limits, desires, indignation, authenticity. And there comes a time when she simply does not accept to remain hidden. This awakening rarely happens through major events. Sometimes all it takes is a phrase heard by chance, a different look, an unexpected encounter, a night when sleep disappears for no apparent reason, or that strange feeling that your old life can no longer answer the questions that now arise within you. It's like walking into a house you've always lived in and realizing, for the first time, that the walls were never really yours. The most intriguing thing is that this process often feels like a loss, before revealing that it is a birth. For a while, you feel like you're no longer who you were, but you still can't see who you're becoming. This phase is frightening because the ego interprets any change as a threat. He prefers to remain in a known suffering than to go through a transformative uncertainty. Carl Jung insisted that no one achieves one's own wholeness by fleeing from the shadow. On the contrary, the more we try to hide it, the more it influences our choices without asking permission. But there is a moment when it stops just sending discrete signals and begins to reveal something much bigger. It shows that the identity you have always believed you possessed may never have been completely yours. And when this realization finally happens, it becomes impossible to continue living in exactly the same way. It is at this point that true transformation ceases to be an idea and begins to become a reality that is impossible to ignore. There is an almost invisible instant when transformation ceases to be just a possibility and becomes inevitable. The curious thing is that this moment is rarely accompanied by major events. There is no warning, no light signal, or no voice announcing that a new stage has begun. Most of the time, he arrives disguised as silence. You continue to live the same routine, fulfilling the same schedules, meeting the same people. However, something inside you no longer responds in the same way. The world remains the same, but those who observe it have begun to change. Carl Jung believed that consciousness does not evolve simply by accumulating knowledge. It matures when it comes into conflict with itself. As long as everything makes sense, the ego remains comfortable, convinced that it controls its own life. But there comes a time when this structure begins to show small cracks. What once seemed sufficient loses its strength. Old goals cease to inspire. Repeated conversations feel empty. It's as if a deeper part of the psyche is saying silently, "You've learned everything you can in this place." The most interesting thing is that many people interpret this discomfort as a problem that needs to be eliminated quickly. They look for distractions, change superficial details of the routine, or try to regain the enthusiasm of before. However, Jung suggested exactly the opposite. Maybe discomfort is not the enemy. Perhaps it is the first sign that an old identity is reaching the limit of what it can sustain. But think honestly, what if what you call a crisis is actually an invitation? What if this feeling of no longer belonging to the same environments does not represent a failure, but the beginning of a silent reorganization of your own consciousness? There is an image that helps to understand this process. Imagine a tree during the winter. To those looking from the outside, she looks dead. There are no flowers, no fruits, no apparent movement. A hasty observer would conclude that something has gone wrong, but under the surface, exactly the opposite happens. The roots continue to work, reorganizing forces for a completely new cycle. The most important transformation occurs where no one can see. The human psyche works in a similar way. Before producing visible changes, it reorganizes invisible structures. That is why so many people believe they are lost, just when they are closest to finding a true path. The ego interprets the absence of answers as a sign of failure. The unconscious interprets the same silence as a space to build something more authentic. It is at this point that the majority makes a decisive mistake. Instead of remaining for a few moments in this fertile void, he tries to fill it immediately. He buys new goals, creates new plans, seeks new distractions. He does anything not to remain in the face of uncertainty. The problem is that no hastily constructed response can replace what is still maturing in the depths of the psyche. What if the biggest obstacle to your transformation is not your fears? What if it's just your rush to find answers before they're ready to be born? Carl Jung observed that all true change requires a small psychological death. This idea is usually frightening because we associate the word death with the absolute end. However, in the language of the psyche, dying means ceasing to sustain an identity that has already fulfilled its function. Think about how many versions of you have already existed. The child who dreamed of a specific future. The teenager who believed he needed to please everyone. The adult who built an image to be accepted. All these versions were important, but none of them were created to last forever. The difficulty arises when we insist on preserving characters that no longer represent who we are. The more energy we spend trying to maintain an outdated identity, the more tiring life becomes. Not because the world is heavy, but because carrying a mask for years requires enormous effort. True exhaustion is often not born from overwork. It is born from the excess of representation. That's why some people feel unexpected relief when they finally say a simple no. Others experience inexplicable freedom when they leave an environment where they have remained for years only out of obligation. These events seem small, but they symbolize something much bigger. They indicate that a part of the personality has ceased to negotiate its own truth in order to preserve a semblance of stability. Maybe you've experienced something similar. Perhaps you have noticed that certain conversations no longer make sense. Perhaps he felt a strange need to be alone for a while, even though he could not explain why. Or maybe you started observing people you once admired and suddenly saw behaviors you had never noticed. Did these changes happen because the world changed, or because their eyes have finally begun to see what has always been before them? At this moment, a little commented consequence of the inner transformation arises. When consciousness expands, it automatically alters the way we perceive others. The empath, for example, tends to identify emotions with great ease, but does not always realize when he is sacrificing his own authenticity to maintain the peace around him. When he begins his process of individuation, this dynamic begins to be reversed. For the first time, he realizes that understanding the pains of others does not mean accepting any behavior. This change profoundly modifies relationships. Manipulators almost always rely on people who doubt themselves. When they find someone who begins to recognize their worth, they lose much of the influence they once had. Therefore, resistance often increases just when you start to grow. Not because you are doing anything wrong, but because the old balance ceases to exist. Carl Jung understood something extraordinary about this moment. He said that no one wakes up alone. Whenever a consciousness changes, the entire system around it reacts. Some approach, others move away. Some celebrate their transformation, others try to convince you that you're overreacting. And that's exactly where many people give up, because they confuse external resistance with a sign that they are on the wrong path. In fact, the exact opposite can happen. Resistance usually appears when change is no longer just an idea and begins to produce real effects. The old identity tries to survive. The environment attempts to restore known patterns. The ego asks to return to the safe place. But there is something that can no longer be undone. Once consciousness realizes a deep truth about itself, it can never again pretend that it has not seen it. It is precisely at this point that the journey described by Carl Jung ceases to be just a philosophical reflection and becomes an intimate commitment, because recognizing one's own truth is only the beginning. The next challenge is much greater: to learn to live according to it, even when it means abandoning everything that once seemed indispensable. There is one characteristic of the human mind that often goes unnoticed. It rarely heralds the greatest changes while they are happening. We only realize that we have crossed a border when we look back. It's like walking for hours in a forest shrouded in fog. The landscape always looks the same. However, when the fog finally clears, we discover that we are on a completely different mountain from the one where we started. Carl Jung observed this phenomenon countless times in his patients. The most profound transformations were almost never recognized at the moment they were born. They only became evident after the person could no longer return to who they were before. There are fascinating records in Jung's writings about people who sought help believing they suffered only from anxiety, sadness, or relationship crises. After months of exploring forgotten dreams, symbols, and emotions, they realized something unexpected. The real problem had never been fear, loneliness, or external conflict. The real problem was living a life built to please expectations that never belonged to them. This discovery seemed simple, but it produced an extraordinary effect. It didn't just change his mood, it changed the way they saw the whole world. You may have witnessed something similar without realizing it. Think of that person who suddenly abandons a career that is considered perfect. Everyone says he went crazy. A few months later, it feels lighter than it has been in decades. Or someone who ends a seemingly stable relationship and, for the first time in many years, starts smiling effortlessly. To outsiders, these decisions seem impulsive. For those who live on the inside, They are often the result of a silent transformation that began much earlier. There is an impressive psychological curiosity. The human brain prefers a known pain to an unknown freedom. Several studies in behavioral psychology show that we tend to stay in predictable situations, even when they make us suffer, simply because the known offers a false sense of security. Jung realized this mechanism long before he received modern explanations. He understood that the ego builds fortresses not to make us happy, but to keep us predictable, and what is predictable seems safe, even when it imprisons us. This is exactly why so many people feel fear when they begin to change. Not because the transformation is dangerous, but because it destroys old maps. Imagine a navigator who has spent his entire life following the same route. One day he discovers that there is an entire ocean beyond the horizon. The discovery is liberating, but also frightening. The old map is no longer useful. For a while, he has to sail without guarantees. Most return to the known port. Few continue. There is a curious account often associated with the processes described by Carl Jung. Many patients reported that right before a major change, they began to notice unlikely repetitions. They found the same symbol in different places, heard the same phrase said by people they didn't know each other, or repeatedly dreamed about doors, bridges, stairs, or trips. Jung did not interpret these events as supernatural powers. For him, they were symbolic manifestations of a psyche that was reorganizing its way of understanding reality. When consciousness changes, it begins to perceive patterns that previously remained invisible. But there is an even more intriguing detail. Have you ever noticed that certain people disappear from our lives just when we start to get to know each other better? And at the same time, others arise unexpectedly, as if they were always waiting for that specific moment. This phenomenon happens much more often than we imagine. The empath usually experiences this intensely. For years, he has attracted relationships based on the need for approval. He gets used to resolving conflicts, absorbing other people's problems, and keeping the peace at any cost. However, when you start to set healthy limits, something curious happens. Some people just stop looking for it. Others show irritation for no apparent reason. Some even accuse him of having changed for the worse. At first glance, this seems unfair. After all, why would someone be criticized precisely when they start taking care of their own emotional health? Jung would explain it by saying that every transformation alters the balance of the systems to which we belong. When one piece changes position, all the others need to rearrange. Those who depended on their old version feel this change immediately. The manipulators realize this with surprising speed. They don't always do this consciously. Often, they just feel that they have lost a space that they once had. That is why criticism increases, provokes guilt, or tries to awaken old insecurities. Phrases like, "You weren't like that," "they're putting things in your head," or "you've changed too much," appear just when autonomy begins to grow. There is another curiosity that is little commented on. People who begin a true process of transformation often report feeling temporary loneliness. This is because they can no longer participate in the same superficial conversations, but they have not yet found people who share their new way of looking at life. This interval can seem like a huge void. However, Jung saw this phase as a corridor between two identities. It is not a place to stay, but an inevitable path for those who are leaving an old way of existing. During this period, unlikely situations happen. Books seem to answer questions that have never been asked out loud. Unexpected conversations produce reflections that linger for weeks. Unknown people say exactly what needed to be heard, not because the universe has suddenly changed, but because your perception has ceased to ignore what has always been present. Augmented consciousness works like someone adjusting the focus of a lens. The reality remains the same. What changes is the ability to see it. Carl Jung used to remember that what remains unconscious directs our life as long as we believe we are making free choices. This is perhaps one of the most disturbing statements in all of analytical psychology. How many decisions were really born from your essence? How many were taken just to avoid rejection, abandonment, or guilt? And, more importantly, how many of those choices continue to control your life at this very moment? There comes a time when these questions cease to be just intellectual reflections. They become an inner requirement. The person realizes that they can no longer keep repeating patterns just because they are familiar. The old identity begins to lose strength. The new way of existing is not yet fully formed, but it already sends clear signals that it wants to be born. It is at this point that the journey becomes even deeper, because discovering the truth about yourself is only half the battle. The other half requires something much harder, accepting that what you called me may have been only a small part of what it was always meant to become. There is an illusion that accompanies almost all people who start a process of transformation. They believe that the hardest time will be discovering the truth about themselves. But Carl Jung suggested something much more unsettling. Discovering the truth is just the beginning. The real challenge begins when that truth demands a change that the old me is unwilling to accept. It is exactly at this point that many journeys are interrupted, not for lack of capacity, but because continuing means abandoning an identity built over years. Imagine someone who has spent their entire life seeking approval. Since childhood, he learned that he needed to please to be accepted. He became kind, helpful, always available. Everyone said he was an excellent person, but in the silence, there was an invisible price. Each yes given against one's will buried a piece of its authenticity, until one day something changes. For the first time, this person realizes that his kindness was not born only from love. In many moments, it was born of fear. Fear of disappointing, fear of being rejected, fear of being alone. This discovery is liberating, but also deeply uncomfortable. After all, who are we when we remove the mask we have worn all our lives? It is here that Carl Jung presents one of the most important concepts in all of analytical psychology: individuation. Many people imagine that evolving means becoming perfect. Jung said exactly the opposite. Individuation does not create a perfect person. It creates a whole person. This means accepting that within each human being, courage and fear, light and shadow, strength and fragility coexist. The goal was never to eliminate one of these parts. The goal has always been to allow them to stop fighting each other. This idea seems simple, but it has a huge consequence. While we reject parts of our personality, we spend energy just trying to hide them. When we finally recognize them, this energy stops being used to maintain masks and starts to feed life itself. That's why so many people describe an unexpected feeling of lightness after facing emotions they've spent years avoiding. The problem was never feeling. The problem was to run away from the feeling. But there is an obstacle that almost no one notices until they reach this point. The ego is extremely intelligent. When he realizes that he is losing control, he creates a sophisticated trap. Instead of preventing the transformation, he tries to turn her into yet another mask. The person starts to want to appear conscious. He wants to demonstrate balance all the time. She wants to be seen as someone spiritually evolved. Without realizing it, he just replaced one old identity with another. The prison has changed its appearance, but it remains a prison. That is why Jung insisted so much on honesty with himself. True transformation does not need an audience. It happens when no one is looking. It reveals itself in the small choices made in silence, in the courage to set a limit even without receiving applause, in the ability to ask for forgiveness when necessary, in the humility to admit that there are still fears. Individuation has never been a trophy. It is a path that requires daily sincerity. Maybe you're thinking that this process seems too long, and it really is. Jung never promised shortcuts. On the contrary, he believed that haste is one of the greatest enemies of psychological growth. Anything that ripens too quickly often has fragile roots. Observe nature. The most resistant trees are precisely those that have grown slowly, facing winds, droughts, and storms. The human soul follows a similar logic. There is no depth built in a hurry. While this is happening inside you, something curious keeps changing around you. People who once wielded enormous influence are starting to lose ground. The manipulators find that their old resources stop working. Guilt no longer produces the same effect. The fear of rejection decreases. The constant need for approval begins to fade. This does not mean that conflicts end. Often they increase for some time. After all, those who have always controlled a situation hardly accept losing this power in silence. The empath feels this change intensely. For a long time, he believed that protecting others was his main mission. Now he begins to understand that he also needs to protect his own conscience. He discovers that compassion does not mean allowing abuse. He discovers that understanding the suffering of others does not oblige anyone to accept disrespect. This perception completely changes the way he positions himself in life. It is at this moment that one of the biggest twists and turns of the entire journey happens. You realize that your biggest opponents may never have been the difficult people you met along the way. They only awakened wounds that already existed. The real confrontation has always happened within you, between the part that wanted to grow and the part that insisted on staying safe. Between the voice that asked for freedom and the voice that said that it was better to continue exactly as before. This understanding changes everything. Because when the conflict ceases to be external, a freedom is born that no one can take away. Circumstances keep changing. Some people continue to criticize, others continue to try to control it. But now there is something new. There is an inner center that begins to remain stable, even when the world around it remains unstable. Jung called this movement the approximation of totality. It does not mean absence of suffering. It means ceasing to be governed by it. But there is one last truth that few can accept at first. Individuation never ends. There is not a day when someone wakes up completely ready. Consciousness continues to expand as long as there is life. New shadows emerge, new learnings appear, new questions replace old answers. And this does not represent a failure. On the contrary, it means that life continues to invite you to discover deeper dimensions of what you really are. Perhaps that is exactly why this moment is so important. So far, you have walked observing the signs of transformation. He understood the role of the shadow, realized how the manipulators exploit what we do not know about ourselves, and began to see why Carl Jung said that no one finds peace by trying to escape from their own truth. But there is a decision that has not yet been made. None of these reflections will produce change if it remains only as knowledge. There is an invisible border between understanding an idea and allowing it to transform your way of living. And it is precisely on this border that everything will be decided. The final step no longer depends on the words you have heard. It depends on the silent choice that only you can make when this meeting comes to an end. And now we have reached the point where no theory can walk for you. Everything we have heard so far loses its value if it remains only an interesting idea. Carl Jung never believed that the knowledge alone was capable of transforming someone. On the contrary, he said that what is not lived remains only as information, and information may impress the mind for a few hours, but only experience changes the structure of consciousness. Perhaps that is exactly why this moment is so important. Not because this video is ending, but because your decision starts right when it ends. Throughout this journey, we talk about the shadow, about the unconscious, about the empath who spends years trying to save everyone while forgetting about himself, and about the manipulators who find space precisely where there is a wound not yet recognized. But there is one question that remains open. What will you do with all this when the screen goes dark? Because in a few minutes, the routine will return, the messages will arrive again, the work will continue to wait, the usual worries will try to regain their space, and it will be at this common, seemingly unimportant moment that true transformation will begin to be put to the test. Many people believe that change means doing something extraordinary. Jung saw transformation in a different way. It is born in small, almost invisible choices. It appears when you decide to listen to your own intuition before rushing to please someone. It happens when you acknowledge a difficult emotion instead of hiding it. It grows when you accept to say no without feeling guilty, and when you understand that setting boundaries doesn't destroy true love. On the contrary, it makes it possible. Maybe you're waiting for a big sign to start a new stage of your life. But what if this sign has already happened? What if the real calling is not in something spectacular that is yet to happen, but in this quiet restlessness that has brought you here? Jung believed that consciousness matures when it stops waiting for the world to change first. Change begins when the way of looking at the world is transformed. There's a simple exercise that may seem too small, but it has surprising strength. When this video ends, don't immediately pick up your phone to open another social network. Don't look for another distraction. Remain silent for just 2 minutes. Breathe slowly and ask yourself a single question. Which part of me am I tired of hiding? Don't try to answer quickly. Just allow the question to linger. Maybe a memory will come. Perhaps a forgotten emotion will appear. Maybe nothing will happen at that moment. Still, something will have already begun, because the right question has the power to open doors that no ready answer can reach. After that, take a sheet of paper. Write down just one truth that you've been avoiding admitting. Don't write what others expect to read. Don't write what looks pretty. Write down what makes your heart race. It can be a simple phrase, I am living to please others. Or perhaps, I'm afraid of being rejected. Who knows, I don't belong where I am anymore. Naming what was hidden is one of the first steps to drawing its strength from you. As long as it remains formless, fear rules. When he receives a name, he ceases to be an owner and becomes just a visitor. Then choose a single concrete action. Not 10. Not an impossible list to fulfill. Only one. Call someone you need to talk to. Refuse a commitment that only feeds your tiredness. Take up an abandoned dream. Walk alone for a few minutes. Ask for help if needed. Forgive those who need to be forgiven. Or simply allow yourself to rest without feeling guilty. True transformation rarely begins with great revolutions. It begins when a small gesture breaks an old pattern. You will notice something curious in the coming days. Your perception will be different. Situations that once seemed normal may no longer make sense. Certain conversations will seem empty. Some people will get even closer. Others may drift away. Don't immediately interpret this as something good or bad. Just watch. Expanded consciousness naturally modifies the way you relate to the world. Don't try to force anything. Just stay on your toes. Also remember a truth that Carl Jung repeated in different ways throughout his work. No one becomes whole by eliminating his shadow. We become whole when we stop running away from it. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to keep walking, even when fear is still present. Maturity is not born when all doubts disappear. It is born when you understand that some answers only appear to those who continue walking. You may never watch this video again. Maybe in a few months you won't even remember many of the words you heard today. And it doesn't matter. What really matters is whether any part of your consciousness has awakened. Because when this happens, there is no complete return. You can even try to go back to old habits, old masks, and old justifications, but something inside you will always remember that there is a truer path waiting to be lived. If this meeting made sense to you, turn this moment into a commitment to yourself. Write a single word in the comments that represents the beginning of your journey. It can be, I woke up, courage, whole, restart, or any other word that has meaning for your story. If you prefer, you can do it anonymously. The important thing is not to show others. It is marking for yourself the moment when you decided to stop just understanding your life to finally start living it consciously. If this content has brought a new perspective, leave your like so that more people have the opportunity to find this message at the right time. Subscribe to the channel to continue exploring Carl Jung's ideas. Understand analytical psychology in depth and continue on this journey of self-knowledge. With each new encounter, we will be taking another step towards what Jung believed to be the true purpose of existence, not to become perfect, but to become complete. See you in the next video.